we're going to talk a little bit more about communication skills in construction. One of the most important communication skills is very, very simple. And that is, say what you mean and mean what you say. Oftentimes, we use what are called hollow threats, or some people use what are called hollow threats. And that is, they threaten to do an action, but they really don't plan on doing it. For example, a painter or any subcontractor, a floorer or a concrete installer or someone like that is not sending sufficient amount of people to the job. And so we threatened them that if they do not provide more people, we're going to buy out their contractor. We're going to supplement their crews. We're going to hire more people. And then whatever cost that we incur doing that, we're going to back charge to them. And a lot of times, these threats are made with no intention of actually doing it. And that's poor communication. Say what you mean, and mean what you say. For example, another example. Oftentimes, the architect may make a request of us, pricing a proposal, or coming up with a suggestion for an RFI that we've done, something like that. You say, I'll be right on it. I'll get you an answer right away. But we don't mean that. We're doing other things. A week goes by or so, and nothing happens. We don't do anything. Well, say what you mean, and mean what you say. If they give you a proposal, say, right before the holidays, right before Christmas, right before New Year, and they say, get me a price as soon as you can, instead of saying, no problem, be honest. Tell them, Christmas is coming up, and then we have New Year's. The week in between, hardly anything's done. A couple days before Christmas, nobody's going to jump on this. I can mail it out, get it out to the subcontractors that need to price it, but nothing's really going to be done until after the New Year. Say what you mean what you say. It's a very simple communication tool for basic knowledge. But so many times, we say what we think the other person wants to hear. And that's dishonest. Let's say what we mean and mean what we say. As simple as that. I'm going to talk a little bit about talking distance. Have you ever been talking with somebody that just got a little too close? When we're talking to somebody, we want to be conveying our ideas. Remember, the communication is the transferring of ideas. We want to get what the thoughts are we have in our head into the heads or the head of the person that we're talking to. We want to prevent barriers, communication barriers. And one of those barriers can be an uncomfortable feeling. If you get too close to the person that you're talking to, that can become a barrier. They can start to feel uncomfortable. 1 to 4 feet normally, and what's 4 feet? A little longer than my hand. If you're within the distance of your arm to somebody, that's normally a personal place that normally only close, intimate friends or family members are within that space. So when you're talking to an architect or an engineer or an owner, you normally want to keep at least an arm's distance from them to provide that comfort zone. Now, 4 to 12 feet, that's the social distance. So approximately 12 feet away, more than your arm, but yet you don't want them too far away. That's a distance you're going to have from people in a social environment or in a professional sense if you're working with engineers, subcontractors, owners, your peers, other people that work at your company. You don't want to have them further than 12 feet away, or when you're talking to them and they're further than 12 feet away, you want to avoid that. Because once they're beyond 12 foot away, that's more of a public distance. That's something like if you're giving a speech, or if you're at a conference or a seminar, or you go to church and the pastor or the priest is up front broadcasting his voice to people that are further than 12 feet away. So the 12 foot plus is really for public addresses. So you want to try to avoid that. As you know, if somebody's a distance away and they forgot something and you want to holler at them to come back and get it, that's not the greatest. Sometimes it has to be, it's a convenient thing to do and it's done. But primarily for that work relationship, you want to have between 4 feet and 12 feet of distance in the talking communication, the oral communication. Now I want to touch a little bit on sensitive subject, but it is a subject that we all need to be aware of, and it impacts us. And that is sexism, racism, and ageism. Our mouth, our tongue, can get us into a lot of trouble. And in our profession, in the construction profession, we're in the business of building buildings that are quality buildings, building them on time, pleasing the owners. We're not in the business of offending people. And our business is not political. So we don't have to be political in building buildings. We're building the buildings so that they'll stand up for the climate that we're building them in, and so that the owner will get them in time so that he can use them in the way that he or she wants to, so that they can make money or whatever they're doing. If it's a nonprofit organization, church, or something like that, they're probably not trying to make money. But whatever the purpose is of them wanting this building, we want to get it to them in the time frame that we tell them that we're going to get it to them, and we don't want to sacrifice quality in so doing. So what we do is, regardless of our beliefs ourselves, the best thing to do when talking about different people of different races or ages or sexes is to use the politically correct terminology. Now, I once listened to an African American woman, and she said, and she was an elderly lady, I think she was in her 70s, and she says, you know, when I was born, I was colored. Then I became a Negro, and then I became black, and now they're telling me I'm African American. She says, I just don't know what I am. Well, you see, that may be a frustration that some people in these minority groups have. But our purpose is we just don't want to offend anybody. We want to build our buildings on time and in good quality. And so we're going to use whatever terminology we have to use not to offend people. So it's best to call African Americans African Americans, and not to be referring to them as colored or as Negroes or as black people, but refer to them as African Americans. And it just avoids any type of offense that you might possibly do. And if you're talking about a female, refer to her as a lady or a woman. We don't want to be referring to her as a gal or as a girl or as a chick. You know, these can be interpreted as derogatory terms. And so refer to her as a lady or refer to her as a woman, but try not to use any of these other terms that might be misinterpreted. Because again, our purpose is not to offend anybody. Native Americans, instead of referring to them as American Indians or as Indians, refer to them as Native Americans. We refer to people from India as Indians. So if you say, did you see an Indian? You know, or did you see elderly Indian come in, for example, if you're looking for an inspector or a subcontractor or something, and you use that term Indian, you're going to be referring to somebody from India. Okay, that is the politically correct terminology, and for business purposes, that's the way we want to go. We want to stay away from any type of racial controversies. Hispanics or Latinos, the word to use in describing them is Hispanic or Latino. We want to try to stay away from Mexican and even Chicano. Chicano can be offensive to some of these people, or Spanish. A lot of times you hear people referring to them by the language they speak. Somebody that is Spanish is from Spain. Okay, so not all Hispanics are Spanish. And so if we stay with the terms Hispanics or the term Latinos, we're not going to offend anybody. And we can stay away from that controversy. And then we try to use the words elderly instead of old. You know, instead of saying, did you see some old guy come in here with a surveying tripod? You know, we say, did you see an elderly gentleman? You see, we don't have to be blind to differences. Differences exist. And noticing the color of somebody's skin, or noticing somebody's age, or noticing somebody's sex is no different than noticing if they're tall, or if they're fat, or if they have long hair. These are physical attributes of the person. If somebody was involved in a crime and there was a witness, the policeman would ask for a description, and it would be perfectly fine to describe somebody by the color of his skin and by the sex. You know, to say it was a white male that robbed the bank. That would be fine. Nobody's going to consider us racist for using physical attributes like that to describe somebody. Or if you're looking for an inspector, or you're looking for the architect, and they say, well, what do they look like? And you say, well, he's a medium-built Hispanic that's a little overweight. Nobody's going to peg you as a racist for saying something like that. And that's what we want to do. We want to stay away from those controversies. Because when we get into that type of controversy, it makes us less effective as a construction professional. And we want to build buildings. And we want to build these buildings on time and build them with quality. We don't need to be getting involved in any of these racist issues. I'm going to go into something that's a little bit complicated, but helps evaluate your writing skills. And this is called the readability test. What you do is choose a section of a letter that you've written between 100 and 130 words. Okay? And we're going to do some examples here. Let's say in a given paragraph or a given letter, we have 110 words in our example. That's number one. Select that criteria between 100 and 130 words. Then count the number of sentences that's in this. Okay? So here we have number of words. Okay? Then we're going to have number of sentences. Okay? In our example, we're going to have 7 sentences. Okay? Then what we want to do is we want to get the average sentence length. So we're going to divide this out. And then we'll have the average length of the sentence. And that's going to come out, in this particular example, that's going to come out to be 16. So we have 110 words, 7 sentences. The average length of a sentence is 16 words. Okay? Now, look through there and find all the words that have 3 syllables or more. We're going to call those long words. Don't count your capital nouns, for example, Bangladesh or Australia. We're not going to refer to capital nouns as long words. But all the other words, that are not capital nouns, let's look for any long words that have 3 syllables or more. And so we'll say long words. And in our example of long words, we're going to have 10. So in 110 words, we've got 10 that have long words. Okay, what is the percentage then? We want to find the percentage of long words here. Well, what percentage is 10 of 110? Okay, and it's going to come out to be 9%. Okay, 9%. So in our letter that we're writing, on average, we've got 9% of our words are long words. Our sentences, the average length of our sentences are 16 words. Okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to add the sentence length, which is right here, 16. We're going to add that to this percentage, which is going to give us 25. Okay? So we take the average length of the sentence, add it to the percentage of long words, 3 syllables plus, that we have, and we get 25. Then we're going to take this 25 and we're going to multiply that by 0.04, and that's going to give us 10. 10 is our readability index. When we write letters, we want our letters to rate between 8 and 12. Okay? So if you do this exercise on some memos that you're writing, and you take a sample of your writing between 100 and 130 words, count the sentences, divide the average, and figure out your average sentence length, figure out your long words that are 3 syllables or more, don't count capital nouns, get the percentage of the long words, add the percentage to the average length to get your number. Here it's 25. Take this times 0.04, and you're going to get your readability index number. And this number should be between 8 and 12. This would be a good letter. It's a good memo. That's a professional memo. This is going to reflect well upon you. And so this is one of the ways that in communication we can see that we're communicating well, is that our reading index, or readability index number, is between 8 and 12. Now, when we're writing a memo, as we touched on in construction communication video, we want to be direct. We want to be right up, want to be straightforward, unless it's a sensitive issue. You know, if it's a sensitive issue, like something's wrong, for example, maybe a window was put in the wrong spot, and we initially measured for a chase, for a mechanical chase, a couple of inches, and as a result, we've got a problem with a window or a door, or a sink or something doesn't fit right, you know. So we've got a sensitive issue, or maybe the architect messed up in the plans and didn't have his dimensions right, and therefore things don't work, and so then the heat's on the architect. So if it's a sensitive issue, you know, then we want to beat around the bush a little bit in our correspondence. But if it's not a sensitive issue, people are crammed for time. To give you an example, architects, when they put these plans together, they get a lump sum. They don't get paid by the hour. So the quicker they put these plans together, the more money they make. It's just like us when we build the job. The quicker we build it, the more money we make. And so these architects work under pressure. And when you send them some correspondence, they want to see what you're talking about right away. So be very straightforward. The first sentence, give it to them. The first sentence, tell them what you're talking about. Give it right away. And then after that, you can give some details about the problem, what we got, etc. And then close, when you close your correspondence, close with some action. This is what I want you, Mr. Architect, to do. Or if you're writing to a subcontractor, this is what I want you, Mr. Subcontractor, to do. Or if it's your action, you say, this is what I am going to do, Mr. Architect, to the subcontractor. This is what I am going to do. Drop right into the owner or material supplier, subcontractor, whoever you're talking to. Close the memo with action. This is the action that you're going to take. And if needed, give a timeline. For example, if it's a subcontractor or if it's architect, and you say, please respond within 3 days. I look for your response within 3 days. I expect your response within 3 days, or within 1 week, or whatever time 3 days. Or if you're saying action you're going to do, you give a timeline. This will be done next week, this time, by next week. So, very simple in the correspondence. Give it to them right away. Tell them what we're talking about. Okay? Then fill them in on the detail, and then give them the action that needs to be done, or that is going to be done. Okay? Explain what you're talking about. Tell them what you're talking about. Give them detail. Tell them the action. Okay, use of email. I'm going to talk a little bit about email. Email become a wonderful tool, and many of us would find business very difficult to do without it now that we have gotten it. And email use in the field has also helped out a lot with problem solving, with communication, especially those that are doing RFIs and doing daily reports on the email. That is helping out tremendously with documentation. Keep email messages short. If you do, when you do emails, the message that you type directly on the screen, just keep it short. That's a good rule. If it needs to be lengthy, it's better to type it up in a Word format or some type of word processing tool. Best is Microsoft Word at this point, anyway, because so many people have that. Type it up in there where it's formatted, you make it look real nice, and then attach it to the email as an attachment if it needs to be long. Otherwise, if it's just a little message that you're sending, keep it short. That's a good one. And proofread. Oh, I'll tell you, if you spend much time in chat rooms or on forums on the internet, you're going to see that people just, I mean, when you're chatting, you don't proofread. You're typing away, and you forget the T on the, and so it says E, and sometimes you get them mixed up, and so instead of spelling the T-H-E, it's H-T-E, and you get all types of typos like that. And these are very common in email because you're going so fast. Take a moment and read through it and see if it says what you want it to say. Sometimes you need to read it backwards because when you're reading your own email, a lot of times you're reading what you want or what you intended to write, and not necessarily what you did write or what you did write. And so if you read it backwards, a lot of times then you'll catch errors that you wouldn't otherwise catch. And remember, privacy is not guaranteed on email. People can pick up what you're reading. And a good example is if you send an email to an architect. It's possible that other people in that architectural firm are going to have access to the email or the email. So keep that in mind. You know, if you have things to say to that architect that you don't necessarily want other architects in the firm to know about, keep that in mind. These emails are public, and emails there's no privacy that is guaranteed. And do not send junk email. You know, you get these jokes that people email you, and then you laugh, and you think, oh, what a wonderful joke. I think I'll send it out to everybody in my address book. And then you get all this junk email that's just you're sent, and it reflects poorly on your company. If an email arrives from you into an architect's computer, or into an engineer's computer, or into an inspector's or the owner's, if they receive an email and they see a title there that's coming from you, from a certain construction company, they ought to expect that it has something to do with the project that you're working on, and not that it's some great joke that somebody emailed to you, or some tear-jerking price story, who knows. The junk email goes on and on and on, and it is just not good for the professional image of yourself or of the company. Try to keep the email company related, and if you like sending that junk around, get a private email account and do it on their home. And assume that the message you're sending will be kept forever, because it can be, at least until the war. Because that is an electronic document that can be stored and can be kept forever. And so if you're telling this architect where he thinks he needs to go 10 years down the road, the company is bidding a job for that same architect, that architect pull up that electronic file, and when the owner says, they're a little bidder, I want to work with them. I read through their brochures, I saw their presentation, I'm really impressed with that company. The architect, 10 years later, can pull out that electronic document, put it in front of the owner and say, I worked with these guys 10 years ago, and here's an email I got from the project manager. This is a technical that he was working. Don't be fooled by smoke and mirrors. Look at the past evidence. So we want to remember that. So if there's a lawsuit over something, all the electronic messages can be kept forever. Some common mistakes we make when we're writing memos or letters. One very common mistake is we write them when we're angry. If you're going to write a letter while you're angry, let somebody else in the company edit it before you send it. Because a lot of times you're not thinking in the right mind when you say things. If you don't have somebody to edit it, read it, set it aside, go home, sleep, get up the next morning, read it again, and head to it. Don't send memos out. That can be very counterproductive and unprofessional. And do not send it to people that aren't involved. Sometimes, well, we're just pounding on maybe a subcontractor or an architect, and we just want to grind salt into their wound. And so we send out the memo to everybody who can think of their notes. If they're not directly involved with the problem at hand or with the situation at hand, don't send it. Just send it to the people. That's a pretty good rule, right? Common mistake. People send it out. You don't expect confidentiality. You send a memo to somebody, when it leaves your fax machine, when it leaves your computer, or you stick a stamp on it and send it to mail, it's no longer yours. I think of the leaves in the fall. You live in a climate where the leaves fall down and fall in the yard and the wind comes and what do those leaves go? Well, now pick up one of those leaves, and we take a marker, and we mark an X on it, and we walk over to our friend's house, and we set the leaf on his doorstep, and we walk away, and when we come back the next day, where the wind comes, and blows it away, and nobody knows it. That's how our words are when we send them out. They leave us, and we send it out through the phone lines, or we send it with the postal carrier, and where it winds up, we're sending it to an owner or an architect. He makes copies and shows who he wants. They make copies, they show who they want. It goes from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. And we have no control whatsoever, and we'll never know the extent of where our words arrive. So do not assume any confidentiality when you send out a memo. And if you put confidential on it, that might just make more copies that are going to be made. Do not assume any confidentiality. And do not ask the reader to read other documents. Now, some exceptions to that may be plans and specifications, because you got to go with the assumption that the architect or the subcontractor have easy access to plans and specifications. But beyond that, if you're saying, look at this regulation of some masonry standard or some roofing standard, or if you want to reference some other material, cut and paste that reference right into your memo or your letter. Don't be making them go search for stuff, because a lot of times they won't do it, and then they don't even understand where it's coming from. Or if you reference a newspaper article or anything like that, give it. And put attachments with it. Show them what you want. Don't make them go look for stuff, because a lot of times they won't. They just don't have time. And then they don't understand what you're trying to tell them. Daily reports, very important for construction. The superintendent needs to be doing daily reports, and the project manager needs to be filing these daily reports and keeping them in an organized manner. So if anything comes up and they say, what was going on in the project November 8th? He can find it. If you're using fax, myself, I've used 3-ring binders, use a hole punch, and I put them in their chronological order. If you're not using fax, if you're storing them electronically, then entitle the report with the project name and the date of the daily report. And then if you need to find it electronically, it's a matter of burning it onto a CD, sticking the CD in your drive, pulling it out. So whichever way you're storing the daily reports, have them in an organized manner that they're easy to find and accessible. The list of subcontractors needs to be on there. What subcontractors showed up, how many employees did they have working, and what were they doing on the job. The weather report. A lot of times contractors have to show why a project was delayed. And if the project was delayed due to weather, we have that showing. Also, the materials being delivered. We oftentimes track materials, and we have somebody expediting material. And if you can see on the daily log, on the daily report, that materials were delivered, and he has a material delivery log, and then he can check on what date the materials were delivered. The important communication, RFIs that were written, sent out, perhaps ASI was sent, received on the project, perhaps a change order was received on the project, any important communication that happened. Maybe a subcontractor that wasn't showing enough, sending enough guys to the job, wasn't showing up. And the superintendent contacted in, he promised to send people, so many people a certain day, etc. Maybe that phone conversation is followed up with a memo. Make note of that memo, make note of that phone conversation in the daily report. And delays. Many delays were caused. Ripper doesn't show up. And so obviously the sheetrock is delayed due to the ripper not showing up. Or the glazing contractor doesn't show up. Or something, some contractor, the concrete contractor messed up on the steel, installation of steel, I pulled on and reinstall it. Something that delayed the project. Make note of it on there, because at the end of the job, if liquidated damages happen, those daily reports, we go right back to those daily reports, and the roofer cost us so many days, the concrete contractors cost us so many days, the glazer cost us so many days, the painter cost us so many days, and we can itemize right how we're going to allocate the liquidated damages on the project. And something like that will stand up in litigation. So it's very important that if a subcontractor delays the project, that's noted on the daily report. And of course, inspections. Architect inspections, engineering inspections, if the project manager shows up, the operations manager, your company officials, the president, vice president, anyone like that shows up, safety director, does any inspections, if OSHA shows up, if the city inspector shows up, any inspections that are done on the job, make note of them. And make notes any comments, and if the inspector left any comments, you put an attachment on that. Also, your quality control manual that you have. The superintendent will be doing quality control inspections, and there's a checkoff list, and if things are in violation, then there's notes that are made. Include that checkoff list, include the notes, the daily report, all that can be filed together and kept. RFIs, we talked about RFIs a little bit in the video on basic construction communication. I'm going to touch on RFIs a little bit more here and make a few more points on it. RFIs really, they help us build the job, but they also shift liability, shift risk. So instead of us just building it as per plans and specs, if we have a question as far as the structure of the building. I'll give you an example. I did a job once where the mechanical engineer had a note on his plan to actually make a cutout in one of the steel beams to pass a duct through there. We did an RFI on that and asked the structural engineer if he would allow us to do a cutout of his I-beam to pass a duct through, and of course the structural engineer said no. Now if we wouldn't have done that, if we would have just cut that beam out and put the duct through there, and the building failed as a result of that, do you think we could just point at the mechanical engineer and say, well, the plan told us to? He told us to, and we just did what the plan said. No, we couldn't. And so the RFI procedure was a way of shifting liability or shifting risk. So we go to the structural engineer and say, this is the mechanical engineer's note. Is it okay for us to do that? And if the structural engineer then answers us in writing and says, yes, that's fine, go ahead and do it. We do it, the building fails. Then not only can we point at the mechanical engineer, we can point at the structural engineer as well. And so we effectively pushed some of our liability onto other parties, which is what risk management is about. In the mold video, we talk about doing RFIs preventing liability as far as the building envelope. if the system isn't quite right because of mold. And also sometimes the mechanical systems are not designed right, and your mechanical subcontractor will come up with RFIs saying, is this what you want, is this what you want? And it's the idea of protecting them against liability, saying, yes, we know this is what the mechanical engineer is asking for. We're wanting to confirm that that's what he wants, because it's a matter of shifting liability. And so that's what RFIs, a lot of RFIs have to do with shifting liability. Clarify. Are you sure that you don't need a vapor barrier on that wall? Or are you sure that this HVAC unit is large enough to properly condition the air in this building underneath these circumstances? Before we write out an RFI, though, we want to check the plans and specifications. Know your stuff. Be educated. Know what you're talking about. Now, I've had superintendents write out RFIs, and the architect calls me and says, why am I getting this RFI? There's a general note right on this plan page that clearly answers it. Or there's detail 6 on page 10.3 clearly shows what we're looking for. And so a lot of times it's almost laziness, I want to say. A subcontractor comes to the superintendent. What do I do? Well, the subcontractor, a lot of times he's an employee. He's not making very much money. Sometimes they don't even know how to read plans. Superintendent assumes, well, if the subcontractor is asking, it must not be in the plan. So the superintendent doesn't even look at the plan. Writes out an RFI, and the answer's right in the plan where it's in the specifications. So we want to know our stuff. Be informed before you write out that RFI, so that the architect doesn't catch you and make you look foolish. Discuss it with others. You can talk to, instead of just talking with the foreman of this subcontractor, call his boss. Talk to his boss about it. Call the project manager if you're superintendent, or if you're the project manager, call the superintendent and talk to the superintendent about it. The project manager and superintendent can discuss these things. Or talk to company gray hairs. If you're a large company, you may have regional offices, and people in the other regional offices may be familiar with this dilemma, the situation, and may have the answer for you. So make use of the company gray hairs that you have. And it's all part of becoming informed, so that architect doesn't catch you and make you look foolish. And submit the RFI in writing. I work with superintendents that just hate doing paperwork, and they don't fill out their RFIs in writing, and they call up this architect, and they're always on the phone talking to the architect, and the architect gives them answers, and they do stuff, and there's no documentation to back it up. And that's not a professional route of doing it. Land use and quality. Give all the information. I touched on this in the video on construction communication. Give as much communication or as much information as you can. The plan page number, the spec section, paragraph in the spec section. If there's something in the submittals, give the information. This is what was submitted on. This was approved. This was spec'd out. This is the plan. This industry standards. Give as much information as you can in that RFI to make the architect's job as easy as possible. You don't want to make the architect do a bunch of research, because that's going to take longer to get that RFI back. You want to make their job as easy as possible. Give them a suggestion, and a contractor favorable suggestion, a suggestion that would be easy for us and cost efficient for us. The route we want to go, we want to try to lead them down the route we want to go with the RFI process. And then do follow-up. If you don't get answers from them, email is great for doing follow-up. Otherwise, give them a call on the phone. If you call them on the phone following up, mark it down in your daily report that you called the architect following up on it. Communication is such an important part in construction. You can be highly educated, know lots about construction technology, how buildings go together, how mechanical systems work, how electrical systems work, how the structural system stands up underneath earthquakes and hurricanes, and the transference of heat and cold. You can be highly educated individual, and if you lack communication skills, you're just going to not be a superior manager. You're going to lack managerial skills. A big part of being a manager is being able to communicate. If you can't communicate, you're never going to achieve your full potential in construction management.